It's ANZAC Day this week, and 100 years ago, Australian diggers were near a little village in northern France called Bullecourt. They were recovering from a failed battle against the Germans and rehearsing for a second go at breaching the so-called Hindenberg Line. One of them was a young share farmer from Frogmore in the central west of New South Wales. Harold Prosser never came home. But a century on, his story is being documented in paint in an exhibition in France to commemorate the battles. Sean Murphy reports.
The wilder the weather, the better for us when we get out and paint. It gives it a bit of character. There's nothing worse than just a plain blue sky. It's just boring. So having the chance to paint a bit of weather, it's great. It gives a bit of colour into the clouds, a bit of pink and yellows into the sky, especially first thing in the morning like this.
Artists Garry Dolan and Barry Back love the great outdoors. They're plein air painters, which means they work outside in all weather. But today, they have another, even bigger motivation for trying to capture the atmosphere in this farm paddock. They're following in the footsteps of a World War I digger who left his home here near Frogmore in the central west of New South Wales to die in the killing fields of northern France. Harold Prosser was one of 11 children, a share farmer, and just 24 when he was killed in the Battle of Bullecourt 100 years ago.
This is what he knew before he headed off to the war. And coming out and painting it is, it gives us a chance to sort of get a bit of a feel for what he lived through. If we want to tell his story, we've really got to come out and see it for ourselves and experience it, and it gives us a chance to sort of know exactly what he was dealing with, what he left to go to fight in the war.
Harold Prosser volunteered for King and Country with his mates from the local cricket club. Unlike early recruits, they arrived on the Western Front in March 1917 with a good idea of what to expect.
They weren't those caught up in the first flush of enthusiasm for enlistment. They had seen the casualty figures. They knew how bloody this war was going to be. It wasn't going to be over by Christmas. And so he's a realist. He believes in what he's doing, and so he enlists to go to war and step into the bloodiest killing fields on earth, the Western Front.
Historian Brad Manera says Harold Prosser was one of 7,500 Australians killed or injured during the Second Battle of Bullecourt.
He died on the first day of the battle. He was a member of the 19th Battalion, part of the 5th Brigade. These are all New South Welshmen. They enlist together. Many of them had grown up together, and so they were groups of mates. They'd known each other in civil life. They trained together, and they fought and died together at Bullecourt. 5th Brigade was caught by fire on both sides. They had to cross 600 or 700 metres of no man's land before they even got to the German wire. And that's how Harold Prosser dies. He and a mate are carrying steel mesh to lay on the German barbed wire so their mates can go across it. I mean, he's not only got all his own battle equipment, but he's got this extra load. And he and 3,000 of his mates are crossing hundreds of metres of open ground under fire from in front and both flanks, artillery and machine gun fire. And they're just being torn to pieces.
Harold Prosser's remains were never recovered, but he played a part in what was the first significant breach of the so-called Hindenberg Line.
Prosser is killed in the first day, but his mates got to the wire. They forced their way through it, and they suffered over the next 14 days 7 German counterattacks, but they held. And them and the British captured the village of Bullecourt. The Hindenberg Line had been breached. Unfortunately, there weren't enough of them to exploit the gap, but at least they had captured several hundred metres of the enemy wire. So it was the first major victory of 1917.
Harold Prosser was the great-uncle of Garry Dolan's wife, Kate. She grew up with the story of his sacrifice and has visited the memorial at Burrawa many times.
So there's Harold up there. So the crosses for those ones who were killed in action. So
It's amazing how many didn't come back.
yeah, he's always just been part of. I've known about him all my life, even though my grandmother was very young when he was killed. He was always there and talked about. He was never forgotten about. He's been gone 100 years now.
That's right. Yeah.
Garry and I have taken an interest in, when we've travelled to Europe, to go to the Villers-Brettoneux War Memorial and find his name, and then go back to the town where he was killed.
The Dolans took their 3 children to Villers-Brettoneux in 2004.
The sheer number of headstones, just surprised me, and that's when it really hit home what we were doing and where we were. All of a sudden, we were confronted with thousands of dead, in front of us. The headstones plus the names on the wall, which were all the guys that were killed and never recovered. So there's literally, thousands and thousands of Australians there, like young Harold.
On a second visit in 2013, Garry Dolan kept a diary and painted to express what has become a common pilgrimage for many Australians with relatives who fought there. His collection of work from the trip included this haunting 3-metre wide triptych of the Bullecourt battlefield at dawn.
I did such a big painting because I wanted to capture the, when they come up, that's all I could see, the entire vision. 180 degrees basically was just flat paddock and a wall of Germans on the other side. And what it must have taken for these guys to then just go over, knowing what they were going into. No protection, no nothing. And that's what I was trying to capture, that sense. This is Harold's last scene. This is the last thing he's seen. He's a young kid that grew up in a beautiful farming area like this and went over there with his mates. Sense of adventure, sense of duty, and and that was the last thing he's seen before all of a sudden, bang, he had hit by a machine gun round, they think, and just pretty much killed instantly.
Garry Dolan produced enough work for an exhibition on Queensland's Sunshine Coast in 2014. But now it's being shown in Bullecourt as part of the centenary commemoration of the battles over the next couple of weeks.
I hate war with a passion, but I do admire the people that put themselves out there for something they believe in. I'm not telling the story just for the sake of telling the story. I think it is an important story, and it's good for people to have a bit of a sense of what these guys went through. And I think that's one of the reasons why I paint a lot of these pictures, is to try and give people a bit of a sense of what these guys actually went through back in the days.
Artists played an important role in the First World War. Painters such as Arthur Streeton, Septimus Power and George Lambert helped Australians visualise the places where great battles took place.
The folks at home were only receiving the dreadful letters and the telegrams informing them that their next of kin had been killed or injured. So it was very important for Australians to understand what was going on. The newspapers produced maps, but Australian artists travelled to the Western Front, some of them at their own expense, to make paintings that could capture those images. In an age before everyone carrying their own camera, it was very important to record the landscape, the events, using paint, using sketches.
Garry Dolan's plein air comrades Barry Back and Brett Mon Garling have also donated paintings of the area where Harold Prosser grew up for the Bullecourt exhibition. This landscape, appropriately, is of a stretch of the Burrawa River next to Prosser's Crossing, named after the family.
I was quite honoured asked by Garry to come down and be some support for him and Kate, his wife, and travel that story with them. It was quite overwhelming there at one stage. I had to stop painting and you could feel the energy from those guys that went to war. They were training here, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up actually. And having family that went to war in the First World War, and yeah.
You had a grandfather?
Yeah, grandfather. He was a light horseman in the First World War, and he came home.
For Brett Garling, taking part was a particularly poignant experience. His 19-year-old son, Adam, is in the Australian Army.
Oh, yeah, look, it gives me sort of shivers up the spine with the prospects of, you know, a son joining the Army now and fully trained, and anything that happens in the world, well, he's probably going to be there. You try not to think about it, but it does slip into your mind, especially when you hear stories like Harold's and whatnot, and the thousands, tens of thousands of other Australians that died in far-flung places, far from their home, you know. Harold would have been down on this river and fished and swam and all the rest of it. I wonder if those blokes went overseas and thought of places like this, you know. In the heat of battle and tired and in a trench, did they close their eyes and just think of being back on the river and fishing? Did they riding the horse around the paddocks, you know, stacking hay? Good memories. Yeah, so a place like this now, and knowing Harold's story, it's fairly poignant to me.